to ask Nelda almost anything. My name is Nelda Schulte, just like my banner stand behind me. And my business is neldaschulte.com, and I help property investors and landlords build a profitable portfolio. And I do this by helping them with courses, coaching, and learning resources. I do a lot of stuff for free, and I charge for a little bit of what I do. I'm doing this because when I bought my first property, I made a million mistakes. You can read that in my article I wrote this week. And I wanted to put my efforts into helping property investors and landlords bypass some of the landmines that I stepped in. And so I founded neldaschulte.com. And one of the things that I do to help landlords and property investors is I bring on special guests who have services that help property investors and landlords. And my special guest tonight is Laura Atherton of Efficient Property Assistance. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
I'm so pleased that you're here because the topic that you're doing is very near and dear to my heart. Laura's an alternative to property management. And if you have rental property and you think that the only way that you can have somebody help you rent it out and get your tenants in it is with a property manager, that's not the truth. There are people like Laura out there. Laura's the best one I know, which is why she's on my show. And she's going to discuss with us how she's helped hundreds and hundreds of property investors and landlords for over 12 years. She's also a landlord. She owns over 40 doors herself. And that's really important because I found when I was dealing with property management companies, they didn't care if they didn't rent my property for 5-6 months. They didn't really understand the whole thing about me panicking because I was paying my mortgage, that mortgage, all the utilities. A property investor gets that. Laura gets that. Very important. They also understand how if you don't keep things maintained on a regular basis, your property, you may as well just flush it down the toilet. So Laura gets all these things because she has 40 doors. That's why it's really important that she does what she does. She's also a long-standing member of RAIN, or the Real Estate Investment Network, and she is the recipient of the Calgary Residential Rental Association Tenant Service and Small Landlord of the Year Award. And they don't give that award out lightly, so that's a pretty big feather in Laura and her husband Phil's cap. And so Laura and her husband Phil support residential property investors by making their lives easier, by supporting them, and they support tenants by finding quality, safe homes. So now I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let Laura do the talking. So Laura, tell me, what is the difference between a property assistant and a property manager?
And more than you know, I really love the intro, Nelda. So thank you so much for sharing that and giving the shout out, because I do think some of it's also not just any assistant or any manager, but also choosing someone that's got the right background and the right passion. And even just a little bit of how I even got into it briefly. Of course, it's easy to say because I'm a real estate investor myself and my husband and I have properties. But honestly, it's because I was an administrative executive assistant for years. So for years and years, I was an executive assistant to many CEOs and managers and in multiple different large organizations across numerous different programs. And what I found is what I know and what I'm able to do specific on the landlording side was no different, in my opinion, than what I did as an executive assistant, a good one as well. So it's that level beyond when you look at administration or reception. We're talking about executive assistant at CEO level, where you're taking care and confidential and looking after all of those components. And that's really, I would say, the number one difference, I would say, is that the landlord, the owner, remains in ultimate control.
Mm-hmm.
I am literally the assistant, not the manager. The owner is the manager. The owner calls the shots, decides the rent, makes the ultimate decisions. But how much of the work do you find in yourself as well, being a landlord, is very administrative?
I actually really love that definition. And I love what you said about the landlord being in control, because when I have rented out my properties, I've hired different property managers for some of my long distance properties, and I'm really hands on, aka total pain in the ass, because I've got a screening process. I've got a rigor. I mean, I own a property management business, so there are things I know need to be done in a specific way, and I want people to work with me on that. And property managers, I found, did not do that. Most of them, or you talk to the property management owner, they would talk a really good game, but what they do is they'd hand off your property to one of their assistants, and they didn't really know what their assistants were doing. So I would ask them, what's your screening process? Where are you advertising? How are you tracking your results? And they weren't able to give me any answers because they didn't really know what their assistants were doing. They sort of handed it off to them. So that's hugely important because that will determine the quality of tenant you get in your property, and that determines your level of profitability. So what can you or your business do for clients that a property manager can't do for them?
Well, and I think even just from that exact example, it is, if you're just being passed along differently into another assistant, or not having, one of the things I walk through with a lot of the owners when I'm working with is I actually walk through, I've got probably a too many page, and certainly that's something people can reach out after through you, Nelda, or directly to my contact, is I've got a very long tenant profile that I actually have the landlords work on. I think it's about 6 pages of who is your ideal tenant, and it really gets into visualizing that. It gets into the values, so that I'm also, really paying attention to what the owner wants, so that this is owner driven. You're the investor. The landlord is the one that's in charge, and I'm here to help. And how can I help without knowing that? And I find that there's not a lot that really take that extra effort to not just dig into who is the ideal tenant, but also what are the values of the owner, and then how do I match those values with the right tenants? So, one of my little niche markets is that that I do the exclusively pet friendly rental support. And so with that, that's a value of mine, and so I'm looking for that same kind of idea. And then you add into family values, you add other pieces. And I find that creates a level of success beyond just a rental contract. We're tying into the hearts of people.
Yeah, and that's huge. I don't think, because I talk to a lot of property managers, and I don't think anyone has any of their clients fill out a tenant profile. Certainly, as a client, former client of property managers, I never filled out a tenant profile, and that's one of the first things I tell people to do in my training for landlords: fill out a tenant profile. So I think a tenant profile is hugely important because your property and your neighborhood kind of dictate the type of tenant that you will have. So, for instance, if you've got a bachelor condo, you're obviously not going to have a family of 5 people with 3 dogs in there, because condos have their own rules about pets and etc. And there's also minimum housing and health standards, and condos have their own rules about how many people can occupy a unit. So, obviously, if the property owner says, well, I only want one person in this property, and property manager doesn't listen to them, and they put 5 cab drivers in there or sleeping at different shifts, not a match. Plus, now they've ticked off the condo board, they're going to get fined. Mm-hmm. And they ticked off the neighbors. There's probably parking issues. There's going to be parking fines. So, I mean, this turns into a huge ripple effect. So,
and I think, that, Nelda, just on that whole piece is the decision piece. When you were asking about the difference, what are those, I can talk about myself and my passion and some of those other key things, but the main difference is the owner is the decision maker. I do not make any decisions on the rent, on the final choice. So there could never be a tenant placed that the owner hadn't ultimately made the final decision on. So you would never have that situation.
So the owner is in control. They make the decisions on everything. So can you suggest rent? I'm just going to get some water. Can you suggest rent prices? How do you determine that?
Yeah, I think, and again, just looking at that general research. So as an administrator, as an assistant, as a landlord myself, definitely I've got some knowledge on what's happening out there in the market. But really, I think it's still really important to always do that market research of what market rents right now are going up. But if you're not watching, people might still be believing that their rents are down, depending on what you're listening to. So you've got to take a look. So I make sure I do a market comparison on any property, location, size, comparison of the style of the property, and send out that. And again, as an administrative task, I send out that chart comparison across a number of properties so that the owner can make an informed decision on what their rents should be.
That's brilliant. Okay, but they decide ultimately. So let's say they've got a property that's, let's say market research shows that a 2-bedroom townhouse should rent for $1950, and they say, well, I'd like mine to be 2010, and you say, okay.
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, there's always within reason. I think anybody is similar to working with I think even on the realtor side, if someone wants to sell their house at, 10 times the cost of the market at some point, you're going to have to say, look, I don't think you can get that. But within the reason of the comparability, the owner ultimately is in control and makes all those decisions.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So the main difference between a property manager and a property assistant is the owner's in control of all and every decision. They have the final say. Okay, for control freak like me, that's the only thing that works. Because I don't like people telling me what to do when it's my investment. It's my name on the title. I have to pay. You're paying the cost to be the boss, so I want to be in control. So I would frequently get very offended by property managers saying, well, we just went ahead and did this. And I thought, what? Is it your property? Whose name is on the title? You need to check in with me first. So tenant profile is a big one. And then what do you do with tenant screening?
I think I would like to say we're incredibly thorough because we have our own years of experience. And like yourself, I made probably too many mistakes when we first started out, quite a few years ago. So, it's not something that is just overnight either. So having that expertise, somebody said to me once was to keep looking for, digging into to find a problem, to find a no. So it's really easy to see all the good stuff. And it's great to kind of fall into that and be like, okay, counting all the good things. But I actually continue through the whole entire process to look for anything that's not right, anything that doesn't quite fit, that might be causing or could cause a problem down the road. So I think our system is fairly simplistic in the sense that we look at the credit report. So we run the credit reports. We actually check the references. I know a lot of people and property managements that are just using these apps now that honestly, there's no real person checking or verifying anything. So we call the work, we verify the employment, we call the past landlords, we run the credit check ourselves, and we do a social media review. So and that sometimes the social media review is the most fun. That's kind of the last piece to see. And most people know that, but you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be, on how much people still have posted on social media where you're like,
yeah. Oh, I see some pictures of someone standing with a gun.
Right?
Oh yeah, I want them in my property. Or people who say they don't have a dog, and there's a picture of them with 5 dogs in every picture. Yeah, and what they write to each other. I always look at how they talk to each other, what kinds of things they post. Are they somebody who's ranting and raving about something all the time, or are they posting inspirational things, or are they a family person, or I look at all those things. I found some very interesting things on Google. When I do a Google search and I do a social media search. It's just like you do.
Yeah.
And I remember one guy who did a social media search, and he had a criminal record. So anyway, from stuff he said, I could sort of put the pieces together. There was a very interesting article on what he had done. And I thought, wow. And then we had another woman who also had a criminal record. I guess she worked as a stripper, and someone got into a fight with her, and she stilettoed them in the head.
Wow, right?
She had a criminal record as well. So when I found stuff like that, it was like, okay, it's good to know. Good to know.
Well, and that's our job, right? Is to be those super sleuths, because similar, to anything, somebody doing a job application, is that's how I kind of review the whole process. Is people are going in with their best foot forward. They're skipping maybe that bad landlord or not sharing that incident that happened at the bar or the arrest. And that's our job, is to dig out all of that. And I think not to look for bad in people, because that's not who I am or what I'm about, but really to present the full character and ensure that they're going to be a good fit for the property. Right. So I often say too, it's not the case of having to be perfect or squeaky clean. We've had tenants that have had credit issues or been through divorces, or circumstances in life have happened in their past, but they've been able to show and prove themselves
Yeah.
and been to be a good fit. And that's all we really wanted. We just want to see the whole picture.
Yep, that's great. And I'm glad you're as thorough as you are, because here again, I shouldn't trash too many property managers. I was one. I own a business. But if you have a property management company that has thousands of properties, and they love to brag about that, we manage, 4,000 doors or something. How much attention is each property owner getting from them? And how much time do they actually spend in the screening process? I looked it up at one point and wrote a review on it, and it was something like, if you've got one person that are managing 300 to 500 doors, they have, I think, 5 to 10 minutes per year to spend on your portfolio. I can't do that level of a tenant screening in 10 minutes.
No.
Can you?
I can't imagine that. We're hours. So, I mean, and our whole process. So from start. So, I mean, start is creating that relationship, determining, what the owner is wanting, what support that they need. If it's tenant placement support, what is that? What's the market? So we're doing all of that research up front, making sure fine tuning and supporting around the ad, which the owner is also in control of. So we make sure that that's being done correctly. You see a lot of bad ads out there.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We want to make sure that's done really well. We take videos of the property. So we're pre-screening, we're showing the video. We're not wasting time for the owner or anyone going for somebody who isn't a fit. We want to have everybody pre-screened and go through that entire process if the property's a fit and if they're a fit for the property before we even get to that. So when I think about the amount of hours that we provide through that initial, I often compare it to that, when you're getting those 200 resumes for one job. So in the same aspect, how do we get through? So we've got automated systems that help us get through to what I say is get past all of those to the real prospects. So to get through to the ones that are the best fit quickly, and spend that time on those top 10 and looking at those top 10 and interviewing those top 10. But I would say if we wouldn't do a full application review, takes a minimum 3 to 5 hours. And that doesn't even count the time that we've spent on all the pre-prep and advertising.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is a very thorough process. That is an excellent process, and that ensures you've got a really good tenant. Now, it's not, nothing is 100% foolproof. I mean, there are times I put people in who looked absolutely brilliant, and I can think of one couple who just ended up being the most miserable, horrible people ever. That they were always trying to find reasons to sue us, sue the owner, and I thought, how could I have missed that? But you're not, you go through a very rigorous process. They were completely polite all the way through. Their references showed them to be very polite at work, but they turned into different people when they moved into the property. So. But they still paid on time every month, and they took good care of the property. So in terms of the owner was happy. I just didn't like dealing with them.
That's a PIA tenants and call them, and sometimes it's also a case of somebody changing their lives, right? It could be ideal, and then they experience a breakup while they're in the home, or a trauma, or a job loss, or so things can certainly happen that are obviously outside of our control at all times. And we're in the people business. So we're dealing with people, and that's going to be unpredictable at times. But I feel like putting that extra. So I would be fearful if something only had a few minutes to it, because you're looking at a minimum, generally a 1-year lease. So you want to be making that decision. I think it's a way more important decision than hiring a staff.
Yeah. So if you do all the work up front, do a very thorough screening process up front, you're not doing all the work on the back end. You're not evicting people. You're not dealing with damages. You're not dealing with, lost vacancy time because you're repainting and fixing and ticking off the neighbors. You have to do the work on the front. That's the only way to get a good tenant. So I'm so glad we're of the same mind in that area. Is there anything a property manager can do that you can't do? Like, can you collect rent?
Yeah, so that's exactly. So when we're talking about control, the other side of the control is the money, for sure. And that is one of the biggest differences, is I don't touch any of the money. And most of the landlords I work with really like that, because some of the other side, and again, this is about an alternative. It's not anything against property management, but some people do want that control. there can be a lot of delays when you're not handling your own money on when that money comes through to your account and how those things are resolved. I think that there's a, definitely a reason and a use for it. When you get to a certain amount of doors, it just makes sense. You might not want to handle your own money anymore. But generally, the size of portfolio I work with on average is a 1 to 10 doors, give or take. It's about, not to say that we couldn't handle an owner with a little bit more than 10, but I find when it gets much beyond that, like the larger scale landlords may want to look at different processes around the money side. And I mean, my background, just to throw it out there, is also in finance. So as far as the budgets and bookkeeping and boring, we can put a lot of administrative support in there as well to have that, but not in the same way, whereas a property management actually takes the funds and it's not even in your account.
Yeah.
We have it. It's all, we don't touch any of the money.
Okay. So the way it usually works with property management companies is they collect the money at the beginning of the rent, and then they hold it up until the 15th. So they see if the money went through, and then they take out any kinds of fees, that like their fees, or if there was a repair fee or something. Usually you have to sign off on, you agree to allow them to do any repairs under a certain amount of money. Like for our property management company, anything under $500, if we had to fix it, like let's say a leaking toilet or faucets in the sink, or we had permission to just go ahead and do it, and then we would provide the receipt and deduct that from the cost of the rent, and they would get the balance on the 15th of the month. Some people never really quite got that they were getting paid on the 15th, and they'd always be texting me every month and saying, I didn't get it, it's on the 1st. I'd say, well, tenant sent it on the 1st, but the brokerage holds it until the 15th. Right. So I go through that every month with some people. But that's okay. As long as they were polite about it, I was good with it. So it's good. Like as a property owner, we only have 5 doors. So I like to get my own money. I like to get e-transfers. If I had more, I might do something. I might have a different system, but it works perfectly for me this way too. And before we had the property management business, we did do tenant finding like what Laura's doing. And the same thing, we never handled the money. The money went directly to the landlords, and they loved it. They got paid on the 1st every month. They were happy. So
exactly.
Usually when mortgages come out, it's on the 1st, not usually on the 15th. So that was my next question, but I think you answered it already. What kinds of people utilize your services?
Yeah, so I mean, a little bit more detailed onto that. So ideally, it is I don't know if you call that a small landlord on that 10 to 15 and under doors. But often I see a lot of what I would call an accidental landlords. So,
yes.
It's great to work with investors who are strategic and have, made their plans on what they want. But now that it's the same as landlords that you're working with and coaching and helping to strategize, we're seeing a lot of that as well that might not have came out of the gate wanting to be a landlord. And it turned out that they had a property that they weren't in a place to sell, and they bought a new property and kind of moved on and became a landlord. And then that's generally seems to be a client we see a lot of. The other client is, so I have a little bit of a rescue my rental piece. So the other side would be, I often see some who have come to me where they need some help because they actually, unfortunately, do have a bad tenant. And that's where we build a lot of those relationships because now that we can provide a lot of support around the exiting of a tenant, good or bad. So we can provide a lot of those services as well without it having to jump all the way to court and bailiff and all of that. Oftentimes we've been very successful.
So do you intervene and talk to the tenants, or do you have an eviction service? How do you deal with that? That was actually one of my questions.
And again, so for me, anything, if you look at it, court systems, what does everything is filing forms. To me, it's all administrative services. So we can start those services earlier and have had a very high success rate because we're not coming in as a heavy. We're coming in light as a landlord's assistant. We can sometimes diffuse the situation quickly because we're coming in as a support person, but we're not a heavy. It's not a court date. We're coming in to say, look, things aren't working well. How can we resolve this situation? We can often have tenants agree to leave and vacate if that's what it needs to go to, or solve whatever the circumstance, if it's been a misunderstanding or, attitudes and things have kind of come up. Definitely that's a lot of the communication. So I would say that the big piece that I see of our role is communicators, as communicating on behalf of a landlord who might be, and tenant both, who might be feeling emotional about different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. We can be, we're a third party in that aspect, right?
Yeah, and that's that. And you're not a civil enforcement agency. You don't come in with a uniform with a badge on your sleeve. You're not police. You're not getting the court order. So that makes a huge difference. We've gone in sometimes. We had some landlords we worked with who didn't necessarily follow the landlord-tenant laws all that closely, and had some big issues with tenants. I remember one, the landlord was freaking out and telling me, this guy's really difficult to deal with, blah, 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 I need you to go in and talk to him for his move out. And he didn't have to evict him, the guy was leaving, but he said the guy called the RTDRS on me and blah, blah, blah. And so I called him, sort of the same as what you did, I'm calling on behalf of, I'm just here to resolve this, to help move things forward. How can I help you? I don't have any emotions in it, right? He calmed right down. He was very easy to deal with. He moved out beautifully. He cleaned really nicely. He was no trouble for me. But then he also told me some stuff about the landlord as well. He said, by the way, this and this has been happening, that and that. And I thought, yeah, I can see why he's upset. I would totally be upset if I were. And I told him I'd be upset too. So when you side with people, usually you can resolve things. Of course, you could get someone who's that crazy. You're not resolving anything. You got to bring in somebody else to help you out.
Well,
but
exactly,
luckily, that's not very common. Not very common. So if you have accidental landlords, so someone who they might have to rent their house even though they don't want to. They might have inherited a house. Maybe they have to rent something out through a divorce or whatever, and they really don't want to do that. And so now they've got all kinds of stuff on their plate that they had no idea what to do. And so they can call you and they can bring you in. Or they decided to rent it on their own and they got a horrible tenant and they have no idea what to do. So you can file all the paperwork and get everything going, you can resolve it. So that is very nice. That is an excellent service to have. And then what kinds of properties do you service? Do you do condos, townhouses, houses? Do you do apartment buildings, multifamilies?
Yeah, exactly. You named it. So, I mean, interestingly, since my background, when working as executive assistant, I worked in government a fair bit, but then I also worked in not-for-profit here, predominantly in women's shelters, so vulnerable population for a long period of time. So, working in those, I have been the operations manager of an 80-unit vulnerable population building, and so that was definitely opened my eyes to a lot of expertise that you require in that situation. Definitely at this point in the small residential, we can handle this. It's nice to do the little 6 to 12 plex kind of all in one building. But mostly we're seeing, again, because our landlords are usually having a few doors of their own, we're seeing a lot of single family, duplex style. We are specialized in the up-down units, so we do a lot of main floor and lower suites, supporting the legalization of those lower suites as well, because my husband thankfully is handy enough to handle that side of things. So we can do a fair full service, but I would say mostly we're dealing with the single family or small residential.
Single family, small residential. Well, that's great. And then the other thing I wanted to kind of backtrack to, where you said you help people legalize their suites. That's not a service I've seen anyone do. And by the way, through Laura's advice, we legalized our downstairs suite in the house that I live in, and it only cost us $2,500. That's it.
People don't realize that it doesn't have, like, while we have the amnesty, because we have the ability right now in Calgary to legalize without having to add the extra heat source and a number of different more difficult, costly things, as long as it predates 2018. So we've been supporting landlords in understanding that process and working through that process and saving them money. I'm pleased to hear that, Nelda, for quite a few years. And so we've still got that available until the end of 2023, depending on what the city does after that.
Yeah, and it's an important window of time, because I have a similar up down in Fort McMurray, and to get that suite legalized, okay, both houses had a basement suite already when I bought the houses. And to get this one legalized, I just had to get the water sprinkler system in the furnace room. I had to get drywall under the stairs to provide a fire barrier. They wanted to make sure that that there were wired smoke alarms throughout the house. So those were the three main things I had to do. And Laura was able to say, okay, here are the three things you need to do. Just work on those things. Here are the permits that you need. And so I'd call, if I got confused, I'd call the city and ask them about the permits, and they'd say, okay, fill it out, do this, this, and this. They were very helpful, very friendly. The process went extremely fast. And it was really, I mean, $2,500 is nothing. Trying to do the same thing in Fort McMurray was impossible. I couldn't find anybody in the engineering and planning department who could really understand from a landlord's perspective how I can legalize a suite. What are the steps I need to follow? What's absolutely critical? What isn't critical? Because they give you a labyrinth of information to find your way through. And you can't if you're a normal mortal. And I don't consider myself a dumb person, but I had a heck of a time understanding their forms, and nobody could explain them to me. And I said I didn't know what was essential and what wasn't essential. So at the end of the day, it looked like it would cost me, for a smaller suite, $20,000 to $40,000 to get my suite legalized in Fort McMurray. $2,500 to get it legalized in Calgary. And one of the main reasons was because Laura knew what to do. She said, this is all you need to do. Do these three things and you're good. I did those three things and I was good. So that saved me a big bundle of money. Thank you very much, Laura.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I do know even in Calgary, many people have gone down the road that you're talking about, that you're experiencing in Fort McMurray, where it had been difficult to try to mitigate through it. And they had actually been misled and done more than they had to do. And so, yes, it's nice to hopefully be able to provide the support to people so that they do what's necessary and not more than what's required.
Because most of us have spent enough money getting our place up to snuff. We don't want to spend $20,000 that we don't have, or can only make back over 20 years. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to spend that much money unless you're making it back. So, property maintenance inspections. Do you do property maintenance inspections?
Well, we do, and I think, again, the component there and how my husband Phil and I built our business, based on, again, part of being landlords ourselves, and we always joke about working together and being married is that we have our own departments. And so he stays out of the admin department and I stay out of the maintenance department, because I'll tell you what, you don't want to see me with a hammer. It's not but we have the in-house maintenance. And whereas, from what I understand in most property management is a lot of similar to contracting, where they're constantly just hiring out someone else and maybe sending somebody in who doesn't have a maintenance view of when they're looking or walking through the property. So we do full maintenance review, I would say almost, and I don't want to stretch it, but fairly similar to a home inspection is done on the property regularly. So we're in them spring and fall as a standard, plus a couple other informal visits, but we're ensuring that the maintenance is being cared for, but we're also assessing the tenants. We're assessing what's going on in the household, how their upkeep as well. So it's not just about maintenance, it's also about maintaining the relationships. So yes. I like that. Yeah, Phil and I go in together working on, the maintaining the relationship side while he handles the maintenance side. But that's, to me, that is probably as important equally to screening for the right tenant, as making sure you've got eyes on the property.
I agree with you 100%, because there are three components to buying a residential rental property. The first one is you have to make sure it's a good investment. Then you have to find good tenants, and you have to manage the tenants, and you have to maintain the property. So if you're not maintaining the property or the tenants, if any of those three things are not working, your investment doesn't work. And maintenance is hugely important. So I have a little story. I had a fellow who called us in when we had the property management business, and he wanted us to take a look at it. He had a suite of property, and it was a dump. It was horrible, and it smelled. I could smell mold. And I said, "Do you know if you have any mold in your property?" And he said, "Well, there's been a little leak behind the kitchen sink." So we took a flashlight out. The kitchen faucet had been dripping and leaking for years, and he never bothered fixing it. There was black mold behind the counter and in the back in the cabinets, and that's what I could see. So I'm thinking there must be black mold in the wall and the floor. And right then and there, I said, "No, I'm taking the property," because he obviously didn't put any effort into maintaining it. And I said, you're probably going to have to rip all that out. Like, that's a major health concern. You wouldn't pass a health and safety inspection. He said, well, if I fix enough tenants, you're just going to wreck it. I said, my experience has been, if you have a nice property that's well maintained and clean, and you're on top of it, you have good tenants. If you have a property that's falling apart and people are embarrassed to live in, you cannot get good tenants. Who's going to want to invite friends and family to a place that's a dump that smells like black mold and it's falling apart? It just he did not get it. Wow. He said, I'm not going to fix it up, tenants are just going to wreck it. And I said, I have been a property investor, a landlord for 18 years. No one has ever wrecked my properties. Never. I mean, some people weren't as clean as others, but I didn't have people bashing holes in the walls or parking their cars on the lawn, any of that stuff. No. And one of the reasons is because I did regular property maintenance inspections. Somebody come in a couple times a year like what Laura did. I mean, that's so important. If you have a leaking faucet, you turn. And insurance, by the way, will not pay for that. If it's a problem that you could have mitigated and you did not, they'll say forget it. It's not our problem. So very, very important to do maintenance inspections. So excellent that you're doing that well. And yeah, tenants do appreciate it when you come in, don't they? You chit chat with them. How are things going? How are you liking it?
Absolutely. I mean, for our informals, we do our annual holiday visit, which is probably my favorite visit, because that's when we just get to come by and bring a little gift, a little treat, and check in and hear how people are doing or what their plans are for the holidays. But also when we do our regular, people are starting to look forward to it, because even our regular maintenance, we do a draw. So depending on, you don't get in the draw unless the property is in excellent condition. So if you fail when I come to inspect, and we follow that up, when we come to inspect, if there's issues, then those are going to be discussed with the owner. And then the strategy on those issues is going to be discussed. Sometimes it's as simple as, if it's coming on close to their lease, they might not get renewed. So that's, so these are some of the other components, so that the owner has the ability to make those choices by having that information on how are the tenants keeping the property, what else is going on beyond just paying the rent. Because certainly I've heard some stories of, tenant who paid the rent every month, but was systematically destroying the house through negligence and uncleanliness. And so we want to make sure that we're seeing those sides of things. But we also really enjoy the tenants that are keeping them. And with so many, the situation usually is the opposite, that they're taking really good care of the home. They're really proud of their homes, and we enter them in for a draw. So they all get a chance to win, rather than doing a $100 gift card for, whatever, for a grocery store or whatever we want to put together. And that's done at each spring and fall inspection as well.
Oh, that is such a great idea. Yeah. I would have never thought of doing that. I should do that. But I've always brought gift cards like Starbucks or, and I always give chocolates, Bernard Calvo chocolates at Christmas time. They love that. I actually get a kick out of people's responses. A couple times, like I send it by mail because most of my properties are remote, and I'll text the tenants and say, by the way, did you receive the gift I sent you? And they're like, oh yeah, I had one chocolate. I was just going to have one, and I sat down and ate the whole box. Don't tell my husband. Anyway, so yeah, I think that is an excellent idea. So you're rewarding good behavior, and you're making it fun. It's always fun to win something.
Exactly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so that was my next question. Do you communicate directly with the tenants, or does the landlord communicate directly with the tenants when it comes to maintenance?
So it's the landlord's choice. So again, the landlord's in control. That's the big difference. So I'll tell you, my preference is sometimes I like to be the one to be handling most of the communication, because as you mentioned earlier, sometimes landlords don't understand all the rules, and sometimes they can get, even if they get it, they can still get emotional or caught up in the midst of something, or maybe say something or agree to something and regret it afterwards. Whereas I can't agree to anything. So whatever the tenants are asking for, I've got to check it out with the owner. So ultimately, it's easier, I find, as a go-between, and I actually present that to many of the owners, as well as, most people I'm working with have other busy schedules. So we've got young, owners with young families. They've got their own full-time jobs. Like, I do this full-time for a living. This is my job. So with that, I'm going to be a lot quicker to reach. I'm much more aware of kind of the rules, and I can't get caught into agreeing to something that I'm going to regret because I can't agree to it. I have to double check. And so most owners really, really enjoy that. So not just having the separation and maybe really a real reduction of stress on not having to worry about those calls, but also just having that extra, almost, I would say, almost like an extra layer of protection that they're not sticking their foot in their mouth sometimes.
Yeah, and it's easy to do that if somebody calls you and says, "Oh, I need this done," and you're like, panicking and say, "Yes." I've learned over the years when tenants call me about something, unless it's something critical, and I'm just like, "Yes, we'll take care of it immediately." Um, I'll just say, "Can you let me think on that, and I'll get back to you." Whereas before, I was used to jumping and react. And what I found too is some of the landlords we dealt with, if tenants called them about a maintenance issue, they'd freak out. They'd say, "Well, that wasn't there when I was there," and part of that was us having to educate them and say, I actually ran a course on don't let your house bleed money, and it's like it shows what your operational costs are going to be, what you should anticipate, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and what all the components of your house are. Like, how long does your dishwasher? Can you expect your dishwasher to last? How long can you expect your faucets to last? Your toilets. So somebody might have lived in a relatively new house 8 years beautifully. Now a tenant moves in. Now you're hitting close to the 10-year mark. Things start breaking down. Toilets, faucets, hot water tank. Maybe your furnace needs servicing and you've never serviced it before. So I found that people could freak out quite easily and think the tenant was doing something wrong and blame the tenant, and then the tenant was all upset. The tenant would call us the same thing. And so we have to sort of calm them both. So yeah, it was better if they called us and talked to us first. And we had a maintenance team. We didn't have a Phil. Would have loved to have had a Phil on our team, but Phil was Laura's husband. But we actually had a team. We had a handyman, 2 handymen actually, carpenter, plumber, electrician, disaster relief. We had everything. So, and these were people that we trusted, who we used again and again and again. But it takes a while to build that team. And as a new landlord with maybe one property, you're not going to have that team. And you don't sort of want to find out through experience that you're getting ripped off, because that happens too.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that now, because team is key. And Phil and I literally can't do everything either. So yeah, the same thing. We've spent the time with our own doors, building that team of electricians, plumbers, HVAC. We do provide the capital plan. I love that. That was some of my background in operations management in the larger buildings, was always assessing capital on how long, boiler systems, all the rest of some of those big ticket items. So we do that with our maintenance inspections as well. So we basically have that age of appliances, age of all those things, and we see it because, especially as you said, maybe that accidental landlord who lived in the home themselves for 8 years and then have moved into a larger, they moved out of the condo and into a larger home, and now they're wondering why things are breaking down in the condo, and it's just that time.
It's just an age thing. Things wear out over time, just like your body. I used to say that, like your body, the parts don't last forever, and they don't in a house either. Fireplaces were always a major pain in the neck because there were so many different kinds, and there was always something that was going wrong on them. You always had to find some specialist with that one type of fireplace to fix it, and they charged whatever they wanted. So yeah, that would frequently be a bone of contention with some landlords, and we'd say, well, you can choose not to fix it, we just don't use it, but your call. But yeah, anyway, it's good to have all those people on board. We talked about evictions. We talked about problem tenants. At 7:43, I want to ask you a couple quick questions. What was your oddest experience?
Oddest experience. It gets to a point sometimes. I feel sometimes like I've been doing this too long, but it's like almost nothing shocks me anymore. So I always have to go back to remembering something that shocked me.
What shocks normal people?
Right? Yeah. Because for the most part, I'm pretty open to just work with people where they're at and whatever's happening. I think some of my oddest, and maybe it's just interesting to me sometimes and it goes a little bit back to maybe some of the screening, but it's interesting to me on sometimes on how much people think that we don't check, because I've certainly, I had one, and this was a little bit further back at the beginning, where we're still filling out paper forms. And so I guess he'd started to write his real name and then cross it out and then put his fake name. And like, I was like, do you think like, how do you think we would miss that? Like, I can see the name that you wrote, that you crossed. Like, I can see that. I'm a real person. So I think some of the odd pieces for me is and maybe it's my pet peeve more than being odd, is some of the lying when I'm picking on tenants. Like, one of my spidey skills or spidey senses is around honesty, and so I always am, I guess, being an honest person myself, I'm always very curious at the lengths that people will go to tell these amazing stories, that are just, not true. Like, and it just goes down this crazy fabricated road, and becomes worse and worse for them, unfortunately. And I
Because
always
they're going to catch themselves in a lie. That's the other funny thing.
Oh, and then the lies make more lies, and it creates this, so I find it interesting, and I guess part of it is because I do catch it really quickly, and I've kind of got to the point. I'm pretty direct, as you've gotten to know me now. I'll tell people straight, as well. Like, don't bother trying it. Don't bother lying to me, because I will catch you. I will figure it out. But,
yeah, it's good for you. Well, that's a good way to be. What was your best feel good experience from dealing with tenants? Because I mean, we always talk about problem tenants or problem clients, but honestly and truly, if you're doing screening, my experience has been most people are really pretty good. Most people that want a decent place to live, they appreciate having a landlord who takes good care of the property and takes good care of them. Um, you know, but your best feel good experience. Let's end on a positive note here.
I love that, because that is, somebody asked me what it was that I enjoyed the most about this, and it is the people. Like, I thoroughly enjoy the people, and we have so many feel good stories. And I think about, just how many people, especially in that pet friendly realm. So we've been across so many people that were just so thankful, because I remember one girl, young girl, just her and her Great Dane, and no one was giving her a chance. It was in a market like now, where it was a pretty hot renters, or like landlord market, and where landlords kind of had the choice, and there wasn't quite enough property available for tenants. And she was just so, and she was professional, and she was so at her wit's end. And this Great Dane, I mean, I don't know how, like, the Great Danes are the laziest dogs. I'll take Great Danes in my properties over most other, and now I'm not a breedist. We take all breeds. We take responsible, so we like dogs, and we'll take responsible pet owners if the dogs will vouch for them. So if the dog's well behaved, then usually the owner is. That's one of my pieces. But so many feel good stories. We've also been able to move people. The other thing, I think people are just missing that when you just become a number or another application. Like, when we're pushing through, we're humans when we're doing the screening process. I had this lovely couple, and that would have been, it was right mid COVID. It would have been about a year and a half or so ago. And they were coming from Wales, and no one would even give them the time of day. And it was a lovely older couple, and they were coming here with they had a small little, like, Bichon dog, and we were able to process the entire thing via Zoom videos, and working through, and maybe it was a little bit harder, but to me, the value that paid off in the end, to be able to support them into coming and arriving in Canada. And I mean, we couldn't even see them. We had to have the lockbox for them to come in with the code, because it was back when they were still having to quarantine upon first arrival. We made them a shepherd's pie, a homemade shepherd's pie, and had left it there for them when they arrived. And it was just like super feel good. Like, there's just so many. I think we should spend more time on those feel good stories.
I love that story. I've never heard of any property manager baking shepherd's pie for a tenant. Why don't I become your tenant? You can make me some meals.
Right, exactly. I mean, we love it. It's those extra little pieces, right, that you do to show that you care. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a couple international people, more than a couple actually, and yeah, a lot of people didn't want to touch them because they found it too difficult. And there's still ways you can process their forms. So if you get somebody experienced like Laura, the credit is the big one, because you usually can't run credit checks internationally, although I think you can now. There are methods of doing it. However, we always got a letter from an accountant to a lawyer, a legislative, someone who's legislated to tell the truth. So that always worked very well for us. And same thing, they were very grateful that we took a chance on them and allowed them to come in because it was difficult for them coming over from another country. So I'm glad that you did that. I think the shepherd's pie is a totally sweet thing that you did. I mean, that was total feel good for them. That's their first impression of Canada, and now they're going to love Canada because of you guys. So good for you. So Laura, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up. Unless there's something else that you want to say that I haven't asked you. I did ask you a lot of questions.
You sure did, Nelda, and I appreciate it. I think that was the most thorough of me being able to share what I do. And so thank you so much for that. And I hope it helps a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll help tremendously. And I'm very pleased that you're willing to speak to me on this program and share what services that you do because what you do is such a valuable, valuable service. Putting the landlord in charge of their own property, which I mean, that's brilliant. So, and there's obviously a tremendous amount of integrity and ethics in what you're doing, and you live by your values, which I'm very happy to see. So, very happy to provide this interview for people. So, Laura, if people want to get hold of you, how do they get hold of you?
Absolutely. So the easiest thing for me is to hop on at my website, so efficientpropertyassistance.com, and you should be able to connect right through onto email. All the information there to reach me is, and maybe a few more details and stories on my website as well would be the easiest way to connect.
So efficientpropertyassistance.com.
Yes.
Okay. I'll also post that in the backlink on the YouTube video when I post this on Friday. So Laura, thanks again for joining me. Have yourself a wonderful night. I certainly enjoyed interviewing you tonight.
Great. Thank you so much, Nalda.